Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to our terrific DFL chair. Ken Martin's been just fabulous. Time after time, he's come through for our Democratic candidates. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Ken, so thank you, Ken. This is kind of a hard moment for me. It's my last speech to a DFL convention. 36 years ago, I first spoke here when I was endorsed to run for the U.S. Senate. Many of you weren't even alive that long ago. But you didn't miss anything with me. But Paul Wellstone gave one heck of a speech to get endorsed for auditor. Eight years ago, I was locked out of the convention hall by our now sensational U.S. Senator, Tina Smith. There must be some frustrating days in Washington where Tina's wondering whether my appointing her to the Senate was some kind of revenge. She's doing a fantastic job, and I'm so glad you endorsed both her and our other superb Senator, Amy Klobuchar. Tina's standing up to the greedy drug companies with her first bill, which would reduce the horrible prices of prescription drugs. She's standing up to the Trump administration with her bill to protect children whose parents are being persecuted by ICE. She's a committed progressive and already a great United States Senator, and I ask you to give her your best support this fall. In future DFL conventions, you will hear from our new DFL governor, and you will decide today who that person will be. I can't say enough how crucial, absolutely crucial it is that we elect one of our terrific DFL candidates to succeed me next January. And return the Minnesota House to a DFL majority, making Melissa Hortman his next great Speaker of the House. We just finished the worst legislative session in my 42 years of them. Devious, dishonest, and driven by the House Republican majority's all-consuming desire to get themselves reelected next November. What's best for the people of Minnesota was way down their list of priorities. Reaching agreements with me was nowhere. Their top concern was pandering to the big money special interest groups who will be bankrolling their campaigns next fall. Why else? Why else did the House Republican caucus exempt the big drug companies from paying anything to combat their opioid epidemic? I proposed a penny a pill tax. The Senate passed a stiff licensing fee. But what did the House Republicans require from the drug companies? Nothing. Not one darn thing. It was one of the ugliest displays of big money's political power that I've ever seen, but it wasn't alone. At least 50 Minnesota school districts are facing budget deficits in the next year. Others are on the brink. So I proposed providing $138 million in emergency school aid to public schools across Minnesota. How would we pay for it? Well, the Republican tax bill provided a $200 million tax exemption to multinational corporations repatriating their foreign profits. Even the Republican Congress in Washington voted to tax them, but not the Republicans in the Minnesota legislature. For the last 3 weeks of the session, they refused to give up their $200 million handout to those big cash-rich conglomerates. Instead, they blamed the school's deficits on teachers, saying their salaries were too high. when in fact the average Minnesota teacher's salary is 2% below the national average. They blame the school boards, saying they had mismanaged their budgets. Meanwhile, a recent news story began. After-school program cuts leave thousands of Minnesota kids with nowhere to go after school and during the summer. Republican legislators claim they care about the achievement gap. What a way to show it. $200 million for big business, nothing for emergency school aid. What we have here in the Minnesota legislature is a serious competency gap. But they don't need retraining, they need retirement. Compare that abysmal record to what we were able to accomplish in 2013 and 2014 with a DFL governor, a DFL House, and a DFL Senate. By the way, that's the only time in 28 years that we've had this all DFL lineup. We raised state income taxes on the wealthiest 2% of Minnesotans and only on the top 2%. We turned chronic state budget deficits and borrowing from our schools into surpluses and more money every year for public education. We provided state-funded all-day kindergarten for every 5-year-old in Minnesota. And we expanded pre-kindergarten programs for even younger children. We increased support for higher education and froze tuitions at Minnesota State and University of Minnesota campuses. We passed marriage equality. Three minimum wage increases, indexed to inflation, fair public employee contracts, and higher renewable energy standards. And through it all, as Rudy Purpich said, jobs, jobs, jobs. From January 2011 to today, there are 287,000 more jobs in Minnesota. Our Minnesota DFL turned our state back into a state that works. So what is the Republican campaign strategy? Why would anyone vote to re-elect them? First, they'll raise so much campaign cash from all those special legislative favors that they can convince voters the sky is green and the grass is blue. Radio and TV ads, direct mail, misleading robocalls, a persuasion blitzkrieg. But the real hope is that we won't run strong enough campaigns from the U.S. Senate to the U.S. House, the governor, and the Minnesota House. They're betting that our party will be divided, that we won't raise the money or organize or energize our voters with a winning DFL message. They're betting that we can't beat them. Well, I'm betting that they are wrong. You know, you always hear candidates say that this is the most important election ever. And it is, to them. Well, I'm not a candidate, and I'm still saying that this is the most important election of my political lifetime. This is an election for the soul of Minnesota. This last legislative session gave a preview of what a Republican governor and a Republican legislature will do to Minnesota if they get a chance. They'll take more money from our schools to give more tax breaks to businesses. They'll stop funding Minnesota Care, let assisted living homes trample on seniors' lives, let drug companies keep their billions in profits. There'll be no funding for public transit, not enough money for highways, roads, and bridges, too little investment in aging college campuses, state buildings, and water treatment. And then they'll really get going. They'll install right to work, preemption, voter IDs, and defined contribution plans, abolish Minnesota Care and MNsure. And they'll finish their scheme to reduce state revenues by over $3 billion in the next decade, requiring drastic cuts in education, healthcare, and human services. We won't recognize our state when they're done. So I have a quiz for you. Are we going to let them turn Minnesota into Wisconsin? Are we going to let them ruin our state? Are we going to surrender our future? Congratulations, you passed the test. But the real test will come next November. Think back to how you felt on the morning of November 9th, 2016, when you woke up to the nightmare that Donald Trump had been elected President of the United States. The Republicans controlled the U.S. House and Senate and 31 of the 50 governor's offices. Think about what we've suffered through since then. All the terrible appointments, horrible policies, and Twitter tirades. And remember that we still have 2.5 more years to endure. And then decide, do we want to wake up to another nightmare next November 7th? No. Or do we care enough about the futures of our families, our friends, and our state that we will do everything, and I mean everything, between now and then to make that future a DFL future? We're a great party. We have tremendous leadership from our superb party chair, Ken Martin, Marge Hoffa, and a dedicated DFL staff. And all of you, leaders of our party, leaders in your communities, and leaders in our state, thank you, each and every one of you, for your dedicated service. The eyes of Minnesota are on you today. So please make your decisions responsibly and respectfully, and then come together. Come together to save our state from Governor Tim Pawlenty. Come together to save our planet from President Donald Trump. Come together to lead our state and nation to a new prosperity shared equally, sustained by renewable energy, clean water, and protected natural resources. Committed to creating a world where human rights and peaceful progress prevail. Come together, DFL Party, to win in November. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. 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 Thank you very much.